Welcome to the GreenPilled.network podcast. If you're just joining us, we are building a coordination, a network society of thousands of hackers, dreamers, and doers focused on using crypto to bring positive-sum digital systems to the world. This podcast features the people who are doing it, and we publish a season of 5 to 10 episodes every couple months. This season is Impact. How can we manifest the meme of impact equals profit? What are the most interesting experiments and ideas in impact tracking? How can we build crypto economic systems that elevate impactful builders? These are the themes of Greenpill Impact Season 2024. Another thing we're doing this season is allowing you to collect this episode. All of the episodes this season are available on chain. You can go to pods.media/greenpill in order to collect this episode. You can also go to greenpill.network, where you can download the GreenPill book for free, join the Discord, and become a member of your local GreenPill.network chapter. Our guest today is Elliot Bayev, who is the founder of Global Unity. We did a really fun impact mastermind with him and the members of the Global Unity community, and the primary content on the episode is going to be the actual mastermind which Elliot hosted, but the next voice that you will hear after this is Elliot, who we're going to talk to for about 5 or 10 minutes about the mastermind before we cut over to that. So different format that we've done in the past, but I think the content here is banger, so I think you're going to enjoy it. Hey Elliot. Hey Carl.
Hey, what's going on?
Really excited to talk about Global Unity and the Impact Mastermind that you did. Elliot, you want to tee us off by telling us about Global Unity?
Yeah, the way we normally introduce it, imagine humanity were really working as one cohesive organism. Where's the platform that facilitates that? Doesn't exist, so we have to build it. Problem is, even if all the platforms, tools, and tech were in place, unless there's a mindset shift or a cultural shift, nothing changes. So Global Unity has 2 branches. Set of platforms designed to facilitate global coordination and collaboration, and a movement building strategy designed to get us to the critical mass and cultural shift necessary. On the movement building side, if someone comes up to you and says, hey, I've got a plan for uniting humanity, to most people, it sounds a little out there. If they had an Elon Musk behind them, we look at it very differently. Instead of a Musk, imagine 1,000 change makers, social entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, indigenous elders all behind it. Kind of have that same effect. It's right now we've built a community of nearly 600 amazing people, folks from the UN, World Economic Forum, Deputy Secretary General of Geneva, founder of Ethereum, both of you, and just a really wide spread of amazing people from across the impact ecosystem. And part of the vision is when we get to that, the goal is to get to that 1,000 before we launch kind of the bigger vision. And so what's come out of this 600 or this incredible network are some brilliant minds that have cohered around different themes. And so one thing we've started is to run impact niche masterminds, bringing folks together around regenerative agriculture or creating a decentralized supply chain. And the one we've run the most is the one we ran with you last week around impact measurement, reward, and incentive. And the idea being that we have a design for an economic system based on impact. But who are we to design this on our own rather than try to, do even the agile approach of building our best version and then iterating on that? Wouldn't it be wiser to bring the best minds in the space together to learn from each other, connect, share each other's work, and that being a great opportunity for us to learn from them, and then that ends up being the kind of first cohort of developers or great minds to help build this with us.
Thanks, Elliot. It feels like this might be too reductionist, but you're kind of like building a movement, and that takes a lot of different skills from a lot of different places.
Yeah, I think the movement piece is very important because a lot of us are focused on the tech necessary for us to, your big word is coordination, for us to coordinate as a species, as a world. But, even if you had all the perfect platforms that could really coordinate all of humanity with 3 people using it, it doesn't go anywhere. In fact, I'd say it's better to have the opposite, 1 million people with no platforms, but a willingness to design them together. And so we do have some fairly robust designs we've talked about in the past, but our focus primarily is on building that movement of great minds who are focused on impact, who are focused on making the world a better place, because we have to be very careful in this space of trying to, redesign society to not impose your ideas, because that's just new colonialism. And so we do have some approaches we think are useful, but we're also being very humble, not to buy or drink our own Kool-Aid and believe that they are the absolute answer.
Carl, you have a question? If not, I can keep going.
One thing I just want to comment on, more of a reflection, I suppose, is that when we did the breakouts, I was paired with someone who ended up living just down the street from me. So we are in the same community. I never met them before. And not only did we connect and discuss similar interests, we'd actually found out we both lived in Kenya at one point in time. And then that night, I invited her to the physical Greenpill NYC meetup. We went together and we ended up having a good time there, meeting new connections, and then we're meeting up again for coffee on Monday. So I think that this ability to pair people and identify this desire to collaborate across social distance, it can be global. It can also be right there in your own community. And so I thought it was a really good space for that to happen. And that allowed me to meet someone who just lives down the road that I might not have connected with or discovered any other way.
It's amazing to hear, and really underscores one of the challenges we've identified in the impact space broadly. That's the theory or the thesis behind Global Unity and the event we run. Kevin spoke at Transformative Impact Summit. Impact is too siloed. People are either, even on the work level, people are either focused on climate or regen ag or clean oceans. And even when there's a mass gathering, it's a climate week. It's still segmented and siloed. So a lot of our work is about trying to bridge the gaps between different sectors of impact. But as well, I'm very happy to hear that, just even on a personal level, because folks in the space talk a lot about the web of trust. And unless there are personal relationships that form through even as simple as getting into a breakout room, we're going to be in various forms divided still. And so a lot of our work, we wrote an article, weaving is a public good. You know someone who's got a network of regenerative farms, you meet someone who's got a soil innovation that can improve crop yields, you introduce them. That itself does good for the world. And so because we've got this ever-growing community of really incredible people, a question we're always asking people is, what do you need? And because we now have this ever-growing Rolodex of people in aligned spaces, much of our work is in connecting those people both one-on-one in these masterminds and even some new businesses and organizations have formed out of the network.
So I think the primary content of the episode today is going to be this mastermind that you did, which Carl and I both participated in, found to be a lot of fun. I'm wondering if you can introduce that event to the audience and also pique their interest for what they should be listening for in the mastermind.
Yeah. So again, we've run these masterminds over the years, and the idea is that there are great minds working in aligned spaces that could be so much more empowered if they just had access to what others were working. And so running these masterminds gives us a chance to connect them, give each of them a chance to learn about everyone else's work, and then also is a great learning opportunity for us. And when you had reached out after interviewing Vitalik about impact measurement, seeing who would be good to, or asking about who would be good to talk to on the Greenpill about impact measurement, the idea of turning the mastermind, which has been so far a private gathering, into a showcase emerged. And so what we did was ask everyone to prepare up to 5 minutes, outlining their work as it relates not to what we normally think of, or many people in the impact measurement space think of, in terms of impact measurement, reporting and verification, which are really just branches. Reporting and verification are branches of measurement. But we run these around impact measurement, reward, and incentive, because that speaks more to the design. And that's where our interest lies. And I think that gets into a higher level discussion rather than the nitty gritty. So what the purpose of the showcase is rather, I know a lot of your listeners are in the Web3 space in various forms, And the idea was that there are people doing incredible things outside of the Web3 space as well as in the Web3 space. And so wanted to kind of expand our thinking beyond just what we normally get access to as folks in the Web3 communities. And so you're going to hear from a variety of folks doing impact measurement or reward or incentivization inside Web3 in ways you might not have heard before, and then outside of Web3 as well. And so part of what we're aiming to do is expand our idea of what it means to create impact and what it means to measure it and what we can measure. So I'd encourage folks to, as they listen to the entire episode, see kind of the spectrum as much as what's out there, what's possible. Because I think, I love your meme of impact equals profit, and that's, our economic models that we're designing are really built around that concept. And so if we were to have a better world that really did work for everyone, of course, there are problems with perverse incentives and all that, or incentivization going wrong. But I'd much rather a world where people were incentivized to do good for the wrong reasons than one where people are incentivized to focus only on, personal gain, private interest.
Thanks, Elliot. Just before we'll get into the mastermind in a sec, just wanted to note that I don't think that either Carl or I are responsible for the meme impact equals profit. I think that's an optimism retro PGF thing, but I will amplify it because I think it's a very simplistic way of describing a very profound concept. But yes, very excited to cut us over to the mastermind. Any last words before we do that?
No, appreciate the opportunity. Appreciate the work you're doing. I think getting the word out about folks doing good is really important, and you're a real champion for that. And I hope people enjoy.
Thanks. Yeah, and like you said, weaving is a public good. So I'd also invite the audience, as you think about the actual object level people who are having impact, think about the weavers behind them who are creating space for it. All right, let's do it. Without further ado, we give you the mastermind run by Global Unity. Enjoy.
Welcome to the Global Unity and GreenPill Impact Measurement Reward and Incentive Showcase and Mastermind. My name's Elliot. If we haven't met, I run an organization called Global Unity and an event called Transformative Impact Summit. And the idea behind really both is that impact is too siloed, that people tend to either focus on clean oceans or climate or regenerative agriculture. And even when there's a mass gathering, it's a climate week, it's still siloed. And that is true not only within different sectors of impact, but even within different spaces. And so the idea behind these masterminds that we've been running over the last few years is to bring people within different niches or sectors of impact together to get to meet each other, connect, and learn from the amazing work that everyone else is doing. And after Kevin interviewed Vitalik on impact measurement, he reached out asking about which Transformative Impact Summit speakers might be good to speak on the topic. And I shared that we run these masterminds and that maybe instead of just sending him 2 or 3 high-level names, that he come to the next one, and we turn it into a special episode of the GreenPilled podcast. And so very happy to have him here. If you know him as one of the great advocates for impact and Web3 and memetics, which I think is actually a very important part of the broader strategies we need to incorporate if we're going to get good out broadly. So with regards to today, most of us who think about impact measurement, we normally think of MRV, measurement, rewarding, or reporting and verification. But that is effectively, those are all really, you could put them under the umbrella of measurement. And the difference I see with measurement, reward, and incentivization, it speaks more to the design of what we're measuring and how we design systems and incentivization mechanisms. And so I want today to not only be an opportunity to showcase the amazing work being done by the folks in the room, but also to expand our ideas of what impact is and what impact measurement is. For example, there's some folks who weren't able to join today, but even just knowing what they do in this context, I think expands our thinking. So for example, we invited Madeline, one of the founders of Zebras Unite. And if you're not familiar with Zebras Unite, they have the exit community rather than exit to kind of the extractive, taking all the cash for the founder model. And the idea is, can we think of that as something to measure? Which organizations use that model, and can we incentivize and reward that? We have another member of the Global Unity Wisdom Council, Josh Cliffords, who runs Free Water. They give literally free bottles of water, and they fund it by selling advertisements on the packages. Is that something we can think about measuring? Who's feeding people? Who's hydrating people, et cetera, et cetera. And so in addition to featuring our work, I want this to be an opportunity for us to connect. We're going to have a few masterminding sessions, which we'll talk about in a moment, as well as, again, expanding our ideas. And Vitalik, in his interview with Kevin's interview with him, said two things that I think are actually pretty important. He said, one, by the time you cement exactly how the incentivization and reward mechanisms work, it can be gamed. And in saying that, he kind of points to a novel solution. Can we design a system that's never cemented, that is always being evolved, and thus it becomes harder to game because there is no kind of set criteria that one could try to manipulate? And the other is that he talked about, can we measure the good that's being done now? And he gave the example of, getting data on who's donating to Gitcoin grants and things like that. And naturally, coming from the technology and Web3 space, those are some of the kind of low-hanging fruit things to think about. And I'll talk briefly before we pass to Kevin. I'll talk briefly about Global Unity's approach to impact measurement and reward. But the idea is, can we start today measuring all forms of impact? And really with this more expansive idea of what impact means and what we can measure, and then later find the ways to reward it outside of just Web3 or tech-focused or very easy to track, data trackable forms of impact. And so that Global Unity's approach, we have a design for an economic model that's designed to incentivize or create new incentive structures by gamifying goodwill, incentivizing and rewarding actions, activities, and behaviors that benefit individuals, communities, or the world, so that you've done good in the world, you come to me, you want to use services of my small business, you say, hey, instead of dollars, can I use these points or these tokens? The only reason I would say yes is if I was an altruistic entrepreneur, unless I knew that my grocer would take those points from me. Then we'd have something new. Then we'd have an economy not based on value, but based on values. Not based on goods, but based on good, a meaning economy. And so the meaning economy is really a blockchain-enabled infrastructure underneath everything else we design so that any form of good can be rewarded. And the question is, say we had the three brightest minds in the room helping design this for us. That would be far inferior to tapping into the total intelligence of the folks in the room and the folks in the space who couldn't be here. So part of these masterminds is to really create a collective intelligence of specialists in the space so that, as much as I'm interested in hearing about everyone's work, I'm so much more interested in the engine that we can create together that incorporates everyone's work into an interconnected system. So with that, we're going, just to give everyone a little context, we're going to hear from Kevin, Orr, and Carl, who are helping run today. Kevin and Carl are running an impact measurement series on Kevin's podcast, The Greenpill, and Orr is part of Global Unity, as are many folks in the room, and has been helping organize today and works on something called Impact Oracle he'll talk about. So with that, we're going to hear from them, then get into our first masterminding session, which is going to be a one-on-one, just a chance to connect with other folks in the community before we get into our first showcase. And that'll be, again, 5 minutes for everyone to share their work and anything related to impact measurement, reward, and incentive, whether it's specific to your work, past work, or a new way you want us to think about that. So with that, thank you for being here, and let's welcome Kevin. Kevin, great to have you here.
Thanks so much, Elliot. Thank you for creating the container for this conversation. Really excited to be involved in this mastermind. And I think we're going to take portions of it and edit it up and put it on the podcast. Curious to see what that looks like. It's always fun to collaborate with smart people and figure out how to democratize access to spaces like this. So my goal is basically to bring people together in order to create a container, create movement around the meme of impact equals profit. What are the ways that we could get people financial rewards for creating impact in their local communities? And what if we could do it without governments or corporations or other intermediaries, I think is the design space. I know that there's been a lot of bootstrapping of the demand side for impact equals profit with the creation of Gitcoin grants, with Giveth, with ClearFund, and now Optimism is giving out $100 million every 6 months for impact equals profit. So the demand side has been bootstrapped, and I think there's an opportunity to connect the demand with the supply, and do that in a way that, in my mind's eye, kind of looks like a decentralized network of impact attestations, which form a web of trust of impact attestations. So I think everyone's maybe familiar with Google PageRank and how the emergent link structure of the web is where every link is a vote for every other link in respect to which pages are good and should be higher in PageRank. I kind of think of that web of trust that has been created by Google and maintained by Google and is so good at filtering out spam and elevating the most legitimate websites to the top of PageRank. What if we could have a algorithm like that for impact attestations, where we could elevate the highest impact attestations and reward those with financial capital, and also keep the spammers out? And to me, this is one of the most interesting things is this network of impact attestations and the web of trusts that we could build on top of it. Because in a decentralized ecosystem, there's no Google to maintain the web of trust, but there could be the Owocki impact web of trust, the global unity web of trust, the optimism web of trust. And, that plurality, I think, is really important in order to get past the problem that once a measure becomes a target, it ceases to become a good measure. I forget the name of that law, but as soon as we start dropping money to this web of trust, people are going to start trying to game it. And the fact that there's a plurality of web of trusts, I think, makes the system more fragile when it comes to dealing with scammers. So not to lead the group too far, but that's kind of my highest, best vision for what we're doing in this space. We're creating a network of impact attestations, and we're going to be dropping tokens into it. So that's sort of my vision for what we're doing here, both from an administrative standpoint. We are creating a container that will create movement towards outcomes. And then from a technology standpoint, I'm really excited about impact attestations and web of trust. I will give it back to you, Elliot.
Thanks, Kevin. Amazing to have you here. We're giving the kind of administrators of today the chance to speak first before our first breakout or first mastermind, and then getting into our showcase. So next up is Or. Welcome.
Thank you. And hi, everybody. Good to see a lot of familiar faces, too. I mean, my whole shtick is pretty simple. Our problems are systemic, and we should think about them systemically. We can all kind of save straws and recycle our oat milk cartons, but the system itself is problematic, and our system incentivizes externalizing cost and internalizing profit only, and that is the heart of it, isn't it? And this isn't a group I need to explain that to, but my soapbox is internalizing these costs and rewards. So kind of if to kind of connect to our previous what we've been talking about, it's about how do we figure out the internalization and really the good accounting for all impact. This would do away with a lot of our woes, but how to do that, how to correlate these prices, these costs, and these impacts, and essentially migrate our whole economy to adopt such a philosophy is a whole other ball game. And I don't really believe in our ability to change as a species, but I also don't think that we're like bad or anything like that. I think that we're just kind of stuck in this myopic system, right? That we're like just seeing what the short-term kind of thing that we need to do is, and that's what we stick to. But people have lives, people have different interests, and we kind of need to figure out how to not essentially get consensus on a grand scale, but allow people to just live their lives and have impact accounted for in it. Make it a little bit more simple and intuitive. Just like now, everything is externalized. Maybe we can do that internalized. And yeah, and I think that if we do want to change the system, wouldn't it be a good idea to do it correctly and think with a large group of people about what we value, like Elliot was saying, and really kind of think out how that's going to look in the next stages. I believe that if we can crack the code on these questions, we'll be able to change the world. And I'm very glad to see a lot of really good people that know bits and pieces of that here with us today. So that'll be it.
Cool. Thank you. Carl.
Hey, everyone. Thank you so much, Elliot, for organizing such a wonderful event. And it's good to see a lot of familiar faces here. I'm actually joined with Ray, my other co-founder at Kripa, and we're working on a project called Open Source Observer. So I'll give a quick overview now, and maybe if we get a chance later on, we have some slides that we can show that give a bit more illustration of what we're actually doing. But kind of as we've been alluding to, there's this three-sided marketplace that we all want to see, where you have funding on the one hand, you have projects that are providing meaningful services and contributing to the public good, and then you have this middle space around impact evaluation and deciding how do you make sense of all this and ideally ensure that more funding is going towards the projects that are having the greatest impact. And I think if we look at where we're at right now, we're getting better and better at identifying the clear winners, the people on the short side of the tail that have done really, really impactful work. And then on the other hand, we're also putting a lot of effort into trying to figure what are the bad projects, the scams that should be filtered out. The real work to be done, though, is in the middle, because there's a growing ecosystem of projects that are contributing. And over time, you want to be able to accelerate their growth so they can get more funding, so they can have more impact. And I think this requires a new set of skills that don't really exist right now in the crypto ecosystem and in the larger kind of grant-making ecosystem that exists both in Web 2 and in Web 3. And we believe that there's like a new role or a new job that needs to exist in this space, and that's the job of the impact data scientist. So someone who's able to analyze grant data, who's able to analyze contribution graphs from open source software projects, be able to join and layer on different sources of data, and ultimately come up with these better metrics. As you said earlier, Elliot, any metric that can be sufficiently articulated can be easily gained. And so we need to design good, simple metrics, but ones that are hard to game and to provide meaningful signal for builders and funders to put resources into. So I think that's the real challenge here. Obviously, if we can crack that open, then we can not only solve some of the big problems that we have in the space around Sybil resistance and creating truly decentralized, impactful networks. I think we're also going to see a lot of new talent and new energy come into the world of digital public goods. So that's what we're most excited about. Again, I think it'll be a big theme in 2024. And our goal at Open Source Observer is really to start creating the talent and the data funnel so people can actually work on this. And we get this new job of the impact data scientist in 2024.
All right. So I'm Katie. I'm co-founder and CEO of Open Future Coalition. And we really emerged, much like Global Unity, out of the realization that the solutions to many of the world's most pressing challenges are already here. They're simply disconnected from one another and from the resources that they need. And so we're really focused on providing the supportive contexts to innovate the technical, social, and financial tools that help best support the connection of these two things. And so, in brief, from a social perspective, we do a lot of kind of syndication and convening in sectors like ecological restoration, food systems, the built environment, bringing together practitioners, policymakers, funders to really map existing solutions, weave common connections, and support contexts for knowledge exchange. From a financial innovation standpoint, really supporting the emergence of contextual funding models that looks to us like things like blended financing and capital innovation, ecosystemic approaches to funding. And then from a technical standpoint, which is where I'm going to dive in today, we've been building a platform called Open Impact. And that provides contexts for on-the-ground impact leaders to more effectively collaborate on the production of impact itself. And our approach to measurement is really looking at how can we support that measurement happening in stride rather than a tertiary exercise, particularly as part of our motivation for being here was seeing how much time these incredible leaders are spending on things like impact reporting and fundraising, sometimes as much as 40% of time, as much as a third of budget spent on activities related to reporting and fundraising. And so now we're working with organizations in about 60 countries to kind of build together based on what emerges on the ground, the right tools to support this transition to really a more equitable and community-sourced pathway for the production and measurement and funding of impact. And we really see this as a three-phased approach. We're not going to get there all at once. And initially, a lot of our work around impact measurement and validation has really been using it as a transitional tool. And so really understanding what are the current mandates pertaining to impact reporting, for example, that a project is facing, and how can we best support them in navigating that, taking less time and being able to spend more time focusing on their work. And so we do that through integrating process management tools. And so we have a full kind of collaborative and enterprise resource planning system that also has task management and very structured measurement tools baked right into it. And so essentially someone can get a notification on their phone that it's time to report something, pull up a specialized form, input that, and off they go. And that can be gathered manually or supported through IoT. But as you'll see in a moment, all of the validation happens peer-to-peer. And only once impacts have been reported and validated by peers do they then show up in a dashboard that they can share both for their own decision-making, but also to support the needs of funders. And so in this first phase, we've been really, again, focusing on meeting some of the current needs and challenges that organizations are already facing in things pertaining to impact reporting and measurement and validation. One of these case studies is with the Small Farms Research and Innovation Center at North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University. We've been working with them to help close gaps in access to funding within the land-grant university system. They're the largest historically Black college in the US. And we've also been working with their community partners to more effectively deliver things like technical assistance and measurement and learning tools as well for small farmers and agricultural producers. And so looking at everything from chat assistance to hour logging to community outreach and reporting tools to help meet small farmers and agricultural producers exactly where they are and help more of that measurement happen in stride so that they can access some of this public resourcing. We've also been working with the Andes Amazon Alliance, which is a growing consortium of organizations spanning the region to really understand the local realities and gaps in access to impact reporting, understanding that we might need to move beyond simply, for example, a progressive web app into integrations with WhatsApp, allowing folks, particularly Indigenous and local leaders in the field who have intermittent access to internet, to do things like send voice memos via WhatsApp and have that automatically integrate into a form. So that's been another big area of our focus, is that accessibility in the near term. The second horizon that we have been focused on is then putting impact back in the hand of communities. A lot of our initial work has been how do we kind of mitigate some of those challenges that are put in place on kind of the demand side. But on the supply side of impact, we're really focused on how do we start to support this transition towards communities dictating, hey, this is what's really important for me to be measuring. And if we can support the reporting of that alongside what's already being mandated to them, our aim is that over time, those more community dictated measurements can start to overtake kind of that which is being pushed top down more traditionally. And so right now we do that by enabling projects to set their own parameters for measurement. And from a validation standpoint, we also make sure that not a single impact shows up on that dashboard unless or until it has been peer reviewed. We have different kind of standards and trainings for that. But overall, we're really supporting an arc away from more centralized top-down kind of somewhat monopolistic traditionally rating systems towards distributed community-sourced impact validation that can directly compensate community leaders and also support them in their learning because they can train to become a local impact validator.
That's about 5, if you want to wrap it.
Perfect. All right. And so some of the ways that we're doing that, arcing into the third horizon, we're really seeing more qualitative storytelling. And so we've been supporting the emergence of peer-sourced libraries for kind of how folks are measuring and how they're approaching these different projects, also powered by things like semantic search, so that folks can continue to grow their quantitative and qualitative reporting within this contextual learning forward peer-to-peer environment. And so we look forward to continuing to support that as it grows over time, particularly with some of our work supporting the capture of traditional ecological knowledge over this coming year. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for having
Molly,
us.
do you want to kick us off?
Sure. We kind of wanted to talk about three main topics today. One was kind of at a high level, some of the awesome work that has been happening kind of across the PL network around what we call blue funding, which is impact-oriented funding instead of traditional green capital markets. Some of the projects, like what we heard about with OS Observer, kind of emerged from a lot of the research work. Funding the Commons also emerged from an amazing network goods-oriented community here. So can talk a little bit about how we think about the R&D pipeline and think about blue funding and structures for that we're prototyping in the PL network. And then a little bit around IPFS, libp2p, and other kind of fundamental building blocks of Web3 that are open source technologies that underpin a lot of breakthroughs across many of the different amazing projects getting built in Web3 and some of the structures that we've been booting up over the past couple of quarters to support kind of like open source oriented impact development and multiple teams pushing those open source projects forward. And then maybe case study a little bit the cool work that Optimism and OS Observer have been doing as visualizations and impact flows, going back and recognizing the building blocks that kind of underpin the retro PGF rewards that have been flowing into those projects. So those are the kind of 3 main things we wanted to talk about. Starting maybe first with the PL network side of things. I don't know how many people are familiar with this. This kind of describes what we've talked about as like a chasm between traditional research funding versus traditional kind of VC green funding that tends to go to companies that are productionizing a product or service that they can sell to consumers. There's a ton of development and research R&D work that happens in between these two incentive gradients. And how we've been talking about different teams that are working on parts of the R&D pipeline is you have blue teams that might be doing kind of like fundamental research or open source building blocks that are building kind of projects that either underpin projects later in the pipeline or evolve over time to develop their own business models as they kind of evolve from early research stages to later in the R&D pipeline. And a smaller number of those, but much larger scale of company tends to live later in the pipeline. And so when we talk about funding structures and things that actually recognize, quantify, and reward impact earlier in the pipeline, these things look more like academia or public goods funding like retro PGF or quadratic funding or grants making or philanthropy. And we've been helping build out some of the tools. And we have this thing called Blue Funds that we've been working to create for many of the different building blocks across the PL network, which allow communities that depend upon those open source projects or resources to kind of collectively fund and build resources together for those projects. And I think a great example of that is building blue funds for and you can have an entire tree of blue funds in this way, where you can have blue funds here for IPFS, libp2p, Filecoin. You can have sub blue funds for specific teams or implementations within each of those areas. You can have blue funds for entire networks that are, say, Optimism, that's trying to flow resources into critical open source building blocks. And you can have, green teams flowing resources to teams earlier in the pipeline that are critical building blocks that they're dependent upon and also want to see proliferate and improve in the future. And so we're utilizing these funds as ways to collect resources from multiple different funding organizations to push this forward. And so if you want to hear more about this, Juan actually did a pretty awesome talk about it in Istanbul during DevConnect in Lab Week earlier. But maybe that was kind of
Elliot.
Go ahead, Mosh.
Oh, I see Elliot flagged 1 minute left. So I just want to highlight some of the practical challenges or opportunities we're running into as we implement this and currently making that transition from IPFS and WinP2P being incubated within PL to independent projects. The first is, I think, recognizing that proactive and retroactive awards go hand in hand. So you need proactive awards to pay for food and shelter, and then the impact or retroactive awards are kind of the upside. They're the equivalent of startup upside, right? And so you can't have one without the other. I feel like these communities have sort of been operating in two parallel tracks. I would love to continue to find ways to integrate those programs more. The second is that reputation is kind of underlooked. I think with retroactive awards, you have this really great quantifiable measure of impact, and then that should also feed into future proactive grants. But that's right now done through a very subjective or ad hoc basis. Like you put it on your LinkedIn or you include it as a sentence in your application. It feels like we are very close between some combination of LinkedIn, GitHub, Gitcoin, HyperCerts. There's some mashup, I think, that could take impact you've an individual or a project has had as measured in other rounds, and you kind of take that with you across future proactive funding applications. The third is this might be a little bit of a hot take in this room, but I think there's also, we all often talk about things being an art and a science. I think there's definitely space to push on the art part of it more. With IPFS, we are creating some focused thematic funds led by domain experts. As we all know, if you've ever participated in a funding voting process, it's impossible to really dig into every application and feel like you can have full confidence in your informed voting. And so in some cases, it might make sense to create focused pools of funding led by domain experts. We're doing one with IPFS and web browsers, for example. I think OP did this with their badge holders and having those ranked lists and research be available to the public. The US government uses this for federal block grants. So I think there's lots of examples of this out there in the world. We can do that more in our realm as well.
Yeah, thank you both. Protocol is one of the kind of leading folks in the space, certainly in Web3. So we're one of the groups. So very happy to have you here. Pete, welcome.
Hi there. How are you doing? I guess I'll just give a little bit of gratitude for being in part of this group. Nice to see a few faces I know here as well. And I'll just touch a little bit on what we're doing at Quaxada and Sentry. We're just coming out of a kind of not quite stealth mode, but we're just coming to the point where on that graph that we just looked at, we're just in the productization stage and coming into product stage. We're an Indigenous-led and majority-owned initiative, and what we're doing is we are tackling the challenge of the current position of not being able to hold value as an asset in protected ecosystems. So what we're actually doing is we've created a pilot project in British Columbia on the west coast of Canada, and we are turning at-risk forests into protected investable assets that are then Indigenous stewarded. Little bit about how we're doing that. We are purchasing the right to extract, so we're literally buying logging licenses, and then we're working to turn those into the right to protect, steward and regenerate, and simultaneously we're returning those areas into the hands of the Indigenous land title holders as well. So the big challenge that we were faced was we wanted to create, or sort of a couple of years ago, there was a lot of protests going on the west coast of Canada against old growth logging, and so inspired by that to find a systemic solution to the extractive powers that were bearing down on those forests. We looked at the landscape of the system in British Columbia and found that actually most of the most valuable forests were on public territory, and they were underneath commercial logging licenses. And so even if you had money, you couldn't protect them and buy them. And what we've done is we've basically mimicked the extractive system, because where you have lumber as a commodity that can be extracted from a forest, and you have carbon credits that can be, if you like, a value that can be extracted from a protected forest, the extractive industry has a more complicated financial asset structure that includes the right to extract as an asset structure separate to land ownership. And so what we're doing is we're mimicking that structure in a protective and regenerative process. So we're purchasing the right to extract and converting it into the right to protect, steward, and regenerate. And then allowing that as a container for people to be able to invest in. And in the theme of today and the different ways of measuring things, because we created a new asset container, which is all built on Web3 toolkit, a new asset container that you can then invest value into and hold value into. We don't denominate it in area, we denominate it in centuries, 100 tree years. So each acre of forest that we protect, we use an ecological measurement index to create a ecological value for each acre separate to the land area. And so by doing that, what we're doing is we're creating a mechanism by which people can invest and hold value in a protected ecosystem that's effectively on the supply side of eco-service benefits such as carbon credits and biodiversity protection, and allows people to put an investment on the protected ecosystem itself. And this is all done in deep partnership with all of the Indigenous land title holders. So we've basically created a highly scalable mechanism by which we can not only protect nature and hold value in protected ecosystems, but we can also create a process of reconciliation with the traditional land title holders. And to put it into context, the scale that we can implement this system in is on the hundreds of thousands of acres at a time. So, our pilot is 136,000 acres in British Columbia, and we'll be bringing that to market in the next 3 to 6 months. And critically, what's cool about that is the cost of protection per acre. So our pilot, because we're not purchasing the land, we're purchasing the right to extract. It's a far more cost-effective mechanism on a per acre basis to protect these kind of forests. So to put it into context, our 136,000 acre pilot is approximately $8 million. So we're talking about $100 US per acre of protection. We also have a very innovative ownership structure as well. So not only are we taking these areas out of the extractive economic system and putting them into a regenerative financial mechanism, and we're doing that in conjunction with the Indigenous land title holders, but our own ownership structure is such that as each Indigenous community joins into this protocol and uses this mechanism to fund the protection and the ongoing stewardship of their forests, they also become part of our ownership structure. So we have a cooperative partnership ownership structure. So as we scale, the ownership structure scales with it. And that's probably a pretty good wrap up within the 5 minutes, but there's a lot of other sort of depth and complexity. But just as the last final thing, investors in the protected forest assets, which are denominated in centuries, the ongoing revenues that are generated by these protected forests, which are realized through the sales of eco credits and carbon credits, are distributed in majority to the communities on the ground to steward and protect the asset. And then there is a yield generated for owners and holders of protected forest assets, but it's shared with the Indigenous community. So the majority of revenues actually end up back on the ground.
Right on.
Wow, amazing projects already. I have a few projects. As you all know, probably. I just can't help myself. But let me share the screen. So, everything I do is kind of built around how do we provide value? How do we make providing value in the public goods space profitable? And I really believe that we can do that through economic means, the same way that Ethereum public goods are funded, or public goods and optimism are funded. They say they're funded by sequencer fees and all these things, but actually they're funded by printing the OP token. This is the magic of crypto economics, that we can fund public goods not through business models, but through economic models. But we're really far from getting there. I want to see it happen on the ground for a project who's raising funds, to help the homeless in Denver or something along those lines. But we're not there yet. So we're starting, and we started with the donation platforms back in like 2016. We started Giveth, and it has evolved many times over and has been greatly influenced by the work of Kevin Owocki, and has recently even integrated quadratic funding thanks to the Gitcoin passport and some support from Trusta Labs doing civil protection. But at its core, Giveth is actually a donation platform with dreams of becoming more soon, like becoming a stock market for nonprofit projects one day in the future when the world can handle it. But for now, we're not there yet. We have a special niche where when people donate on Giveth, if they're a verified project, so we'll actually do the work of looking at these projects, making sure they are who they say they are, that they're providing public goods to society, and actually creating real value. They'll become givebacks eligible, and when people donate to that project, they'll actually get give tokens in return. So it's kind of like donation mining, you could think of it. Every 2 weeks, we give out 1 million give tokens to the projects that receive donations on the platform. And we have super easy onboarding. We're really geared towards people who are not crypto savvy. But we also, at the same time, are now we have QF rounds, and I want to just show off. We have a huge quadratic funding round with Polygon. Actually, Polygon's running a QF round on us and on Gitcoin. The more technical projects are going on Gitcoin, and the more social projects are actually on Giveth. So the projects because Giveth is really geared towards the impact projects in the space. But the biggest problem, it's not loading very well, so I'll just let it go. The biggest problem that Giveth has actually faced is people are losing funds in the impact space because crypto is too hard. And we don't have the tools right now to manage those funds. Actually, the last winner of our QF round, 2 rounds ago, they lost all of the money that they raised by clicking the wrong link, and they got scammed. And it's like, it's very discouraging as a platform who's trying to support nonprofit projects to continually see them lose their funding because they can't manage crypto with the tools that we give them today. And so actually I'm working on another project that is called ENS. Well, we'll see exactly what it's called today, but we're probably going to call it ENS Wallets. We're working with the ENS ecosystem. We're an official service provider for ENS, to provide a wallet integration with ENS that can make holding assets in crypto super simple and super safe. I'll show the onboarding flow first, I guess, because now we have account abstraction. We can make holding crypto so easy. The onboarding process, normally it's like you have to have these 12 words, and there's all this like, be afraid, you're going to lose your 12 words. We can make it super simple. You just log in with Google, choose a username, and then you have your wallet. Create a wallet. And we want to make a wallet that is not easy to scam and not able to do everything. All the wallets in the ecosystem, it's like you can do everything with this thing. We don't want to make it so you can do everything. We want to make it so you can do the simple things, the things that you need to do, where you don't need to know about the networks, obscuring networks, obscuring the fact that you even have a 0x address. What is that thing? Who cares? Why do you need to know a 0x address? It's like typing an IP address for a website. No one does that. You could, but you shouldn't have to. And so with ENS wallets, we're actually going to make it so that any project can deploy their own wallet. They just have to have an ENS name. And with that ENS name, we will give them their own wallet portal. So for instance, we have account.eth, and we have unicorn.eth, and we have other few nice ENS names. So let's say you have yourproject.eth. You go to yourproject.eth.limo, and using with us, you can deploy your own wallet onboarding software where people can just log in with Google, and all of a sudden they'll have alice.yourproject.eth as their domain name. And then from there, they have a super simple wallet where they can receive the donations that they receive. They can manage their funds. They can swap. They can withdraw to an exchange and deposit from an exchange. But that's basically it. They can connect to whitelisted applications. They can do very safe things. Someone sends them a link that's like to a scam application, they can't even connect to it. So no worries. There's no private key to be stolen. But as they start to have more and more money in their wallet, then we can actually ask them to add more and more protections. Add two-factor authentication, add these things, but we don't scare them up front. We scare them, we scare them as they have a right to be scared, right? Like $500, okay, like add something so that you don't just leave your Google account open and it's gone. Add something on your phone. Oh,
Just an FYI, that's about 5. So if you want to,
sure, thank you. I missed that 1 minute
it's
in
all
the
good.
chat.
No, it's all good.
So,
If you feel free to wrap up.
Yeah, thanks, Elliot. So yeah, this is the idea, and the coolest thing, the last thing I'll say is that you can actually earn a profit from swaps if you onboard the users. So every user that you onboard, you will get recurring revenue for every swap that they make for the life of their use of the wallet. So this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to solve the custodian issue without having to have a custodian. It's a huge challenge, but luckily we're partnered with ENS to do it, and I'm very excited to bring it to you guys today. First time I've ever really presented it anywhere. So
thanks, Elliot. So yeah, I'm Ashley. I guess we'll start with one of the major things that I have been focusing on in sort of crypto and Web3 in general is how do you solve the problem of access to credit, particularly in places where, whether in the US, we have like redlining practices that have led to discriminatory practices where people, haven't been able to have affordable credit in the first place, but then also working and living in places across Africa and understanding when we don't have a functioning financial system, what types of practices do people come up with in order to address that issue? And so we built an open source protocol, which is called the Stable Credit Protocol, which is a more affordable way for communities to provide credit to each other. It's based upon this concept called mutual credit, but we address some of the core issues with mutual credit systems that exist today by turning it into sort of a risk management system where people are, evaluated when they're entering the network, and then they're incentivized to keep participating. So it solves a lot of the issues that mutual credit networks run into at scale, which basically have to do with people not being incentivized to participate in the right way and for credit lines not being issued in the right way. So once we finished building that system, we created a BC studio, which is called Radical Systems. And my focus there is finding people that are doing really interesting projects in the real world related to impact that are really doing nothing related to tech. So one of our first entrepreneurs is a guy in Baltimore, Maryland, who's a chef, who's getting local food into the school system there. And so he's running into a lot of issues with the financial sustainability of that working. And so we're partnering with him to basically construct a sort of cooperative network that allows people to participate to help create this local food network. And they do so on the basis of being able to earn credit so they can spend back with the meals that are being produced. So it helps like drive down the cost of being able to set up networks like this. So we're, as an organization, going on the ground first, identifying folks, and then saying, given this kind of Web3 impact, new funding space, what kind of systems can we take from over here to help partner and scale these operations on the ground, which really need a lot of help. And I think this has come up with a few different folks here that I think one of the major barriers that we have had as sort of this like impact space is the investment in structuring deals with real world entrepreneurs that isn't happening, that is needed in order to bring sort of the larger world of capital to the table. So the reason of having a BC studio is saying, how can we kind of get ahead of that problem, invest kind of time and resources to get these projects and entrepreneurs to the point where then we can go to the larger capital community and say, actually, this is a safe long-term investment that's not only going to give you a return, but it may not be like the type of return that we're expecting in sort of the private markets today that's unsustainable in the first place, but it's also creating all this impact. And we've already done the work to structure that for you ahead of time. So that's the type of thing we're doing. One of our other partners is a group called All in One Collective. They're setting up arts, social impact, and now tech incubators. The first one's here in Brooklyn, where I am, at a church in Flatbush that's been renovated and opening in the spring. And we're working with them to basically incentivize the collaboration amongst the members. So you can imagine, like, in sort of your traditional co-working space model where people are just renting space and there's really nothing like incentivizing people to work together. So we're actually using the protocol there to say that the members in the space need to collaborate with each other once a month. So that means, like, maybe you need to make a logo for someone. Maybe you need to build a website for someone. Maybe you just need to work the front desk, right? So there are different ways that people can then work together and ultimately start to build these like economic engines together. And I guess finally, in terms of, things that we're looking for, things we're interested in, this is an open source protocol. Our team kind of has a whole breadth of experience from, investigative journalism that we do on the ground with our partners to really helping structure these deals. And so we're just really interested in collaborating with other people, mostly on the front of how to integrate with the real world and network that we have. So that's my spiel. I'll give my little email in the chat. And thanks, Elliot, for organizing this.
Yeah, amazing, and appreciate those who are trying to bring these new tools to those who are often not given access to traditional economic systems or funding.
My name's Seth Benson. I'm here to talk about SourceCred. SourceCred is a tool for communities to measure and reward value creation. It is based on the PageRank algorithm, which Kevin was mentioning earlier. This is what Google famously uses to rank its web pages. And the basic idea is that instead of links on web pages, you're just looking at interactions with contributions. So if I submit a pull request with some code and someone reviews it, that's like them linking to my site or effectively endorsing or voting for the contribution. And then what SourceCred does is it just takes all that data, puts it into PageRank, and creates cred scores for every contribution and every contributor. So SourceCred is dead. Long live SourceCred. SourceCred is not dead, but it's been in kind of low power mode for the last year and a half, 2 years. It has not had funding, despite having some big initial success and some major integrations with some big projects. And so in this presentation, I just wanted to talk about some of the failure modes that I've noticed and then synthesize those into an idea that I'm pursuing with a Gitcoin grant called PlaceCred, which is just what I'm calling for using SourceCred to explore something that I call place-based reputation. A little backstory, SourceCred dogfooded its own technology from 2019 to 2022, paying its contributors just directly via their cred scores. They distributed around $2 million worth of its token grain, which was mostly bought by Protocol Labs, where SourceCred was originally conceived. If you're interested in a deep dive on this, we actually had some ethnographers embedded with us studying, and they wrote a really great paper called The Credsperiment, an ethnography of a contribution system. And their main framing, I think, is useful here. They pointed out that there are sort of two waves of SourceCred. The first wave had the hypothesis of that Web3 can outcompete capitalism by adding better information to markets. The second wave had the hypothesis of that Web3 should abandon capitalism and develop tools for mutual support. I like to call this my personal French Revolution. And after I sort of processed some of the PTSD around that and did some sense making with the SourceCred community, which is still around, I reevaluated some of my personal hypotheses going in, which I think were challenged by the whole experience. The main one being self-sovereign valuation. If crypto disrupted the banking system by decentralizing custody, can we disrupt corporations by decentralizing valuation? I actually think that this held pretty well. SourceCred does an amazingly good job at getting sort of roughly a good valuation from the whole community. However, that eventually fails because if you can't align people around a goal, then the money runs out, which is what happened. The second hypothesis that I had as a anarchist, I guess, was that if we can have a protocol that allows a community to value contributions in a decentralized way, we can get rid of a lot of formal governance, a lot of hierarchy, or at least create, better formal governance mechanisms. I do still think that this is possible. However, I think that in SourceCred, in a lot of the projects that use SourceCred, this largely failed. Turns out alignment and also importantly accountability are just not something that is solved by markets, essentially. And the last one, prefigurative politics. Like a lot of people, I got into crypto and DAOs in 2018 because I wanted to just, live my politics and my values, not just talk about it. And on a personal level, I think that this has absolutely happened in to an amazing degree. On a collective level in SourceCred and in other projects, I'm largely seeing this failing, especially when it comes to governing the parameters of the system or creating new features. Essentially, if you have misalignment and conflict and you're viewing your sort of opponent's ideas an extension of their evil ideology, you not only can't accept that idea, you go in the opposite direction. And because the translation of values in politics to algorithmic choices has this huge number of degrees of freedom and ambiguity, what that leads to is just sort of this departure from reality and just sort of really arbitrary decisions, which is bad and leads to more conflict. So I have sort of synthesized a lot of my learnings into this idea that I'm calling place cred. And I'll just present the ideas as just sort of a sort of alchemy that's meant to sort of suggest things, not necessarily the answers.
And Seth, just to give you a heads up, we're at time. So if you want to,
yeah,
no, it's okay. Go ahead, but we'll have to wrap shortly.
Yeah, 30 seconds. Basically, we're just going to look at IRL and face-to-face interactions, particularly long-term interactions, because those are Sybil resistance. Naturally solve accountability because people just ghost if they can't resolve conflict. And instead of collectively trying to decide on parameters, individuals will tweak their own parameters and upload them to an algorithm which will automatically synthesize them for them.
So next up, we have Benjamin from Open Civics. And part of the reason I really wanted them here, Benjamin and Patricia, is they're working on some brilliant civic innovation tools and processes. And can we think of citizenship as a form of impact we're measuring, participating in governance, not just in your DAO or your tech focused organization, but in the world at large. So Benjamin, 5 minutes on the clock.
Great. Thank you, Elliot. What an incredible group of people you always gather. I'm always honored to be part of it. So a little bit about Open Civics. I sometimes refer to it as a negative space organization because it is focused on interoperability between initiatives and coalescing into a process of strategic alignment between multiple stakeholders who are orienting around a shared systemic outcome. And so this year for us is really focused on researching those processes. And we're working with two really incredible small groups of initiatives, which I can't disclose who they are. Some of them are on this call. And we're using those collaborative instances as opportunities to research and publish a white paper on stigmergic coordination. And the idea here is to develop a toolkit that allows any group of stakeholders to coalesce around a strategic outcome and to set budgetary and KPI goals collaboratively. And the way that this relates to impact measurement and reporting is really by placing the burden of identifying impact goals on the stakeholder groups themselves who are contributing to creating that impact. And then having a kind of a referee, and that's the role that Open Civics is playing, is by holding the space in between multiple groups. How can we hold those groups accountable to the goals that they set for themselves? And how can we attach tranches of funding to the delivery of different goals within a collaborative process? And so the initial explorations that we're engaged in are around bioregional regeneration and funding and governance and legal, and really looking at how can environmental data integrate and interoperate with local frameworks for bioregional hubs, funding models like nature-backed currencies, and Indigenous First Nations knowledge and traditional ecological knowledge. And so as we go through that process of bringing those stakeholders together, we will produce a dynamic strategic roadmap, which is a combination of systems mapping as well as a very tactical strategic guide for those organizations to set up the infrastructure to make their individual initiatives interoperable with each other and to produce public goods that allow all of the organizations participating to scale the impact. And we really feel like this is a necessary approach for working in the civic space, because we're looking at public goods that should be accessible to all members of society. And so there's a design philosophy embedded in this approach that is really focusing in on designing for interoperability, designing for open source, and aligning the incentives of each of those stakeholder groups to produce the core infrastructure that without coordination, they wouldn't have the incentive to produce. And so we're going to be conducting that research over the course of the next quarter, and we'll be adapting that research into on-chain socio-technical protocols that would enable any group of organizations to come together and engage in that kind of a process.
So I will first mention the Solar Foundation. So yes, my co-founder and I, Colleen, started the Solar Foundation just over a year ago. We're a Web3 focused nonprofit, really working on funding solar energy projects in the global south. We've been doing work in Uganda, Nigeria, Kenya, Tanzania, and then Puerto Rico in the last year. So we've successfully deployed about 7 projects and impacted what we believe is close to 800 students and individuals to date. So had a great start of our year. That work has led us to the same problem that every nonprofit NGO has out there, is how do you continue raising enough funds to go actually do your mission? How do you really fund the great positive change you want to make in the world? And since we are so tied into the Web3 space, we really have begun to think a lot more about impact and how we can tell the story of the impact that we're having with all of our projects in a way that then we can begin to try and retroactively fund that work through traditional donors and philanthropists. And so that takes me into my work with Spark. And so Spark has been around for a while, but is currently working on a protocol for generating impact certificates. And one of the first tools that we've put out is called Deracy. And I'm sure there's been some talk of hypercerts throughout the call and maybe some of the discussions, but the tool allows you to evaluate impact claims made with hypercerts as a way to begin to close that loop, because we see that there's sort of this fundamental like 3-sided market where you have claims of impact, you've got to have somebody evaluating that impact, and then you have to have this marketplace that's going to actually purchase that impact once it's been evaluated. And so with that tool, along with we're building up the protocol itself is called Impact Scribe. And so the idea is that we'll be able to generate NFT impact certificate that can then hold all of these other NFTs. So it has a token bound account. For any of those that aren't super technical, it just means that this NFT owns like a wallet that can be filled with all of the stories, the claims, and the evaluations of impact that projects are having in the world. And so maybe to take it to the maybe a little higher level picture, I think that as Kevin mentioned in the front of the call, we're starting to see some amazing experiments, particularly retro PGF, in terms of retroactive funding digital public goods. And where we hope to see grow is a similar experiments at that kind of scale with physical public goods. So in the case of like the Solar Foundation, how can we go and execute our work, build solar projects on a school in Uganda, tell that story through the use of this technology, and how can we begin to stand up a marketplace that has retroactive funding for that kind of work? If we look at the kind of philanthropic and giving dollars in the US alone, that's like $500 billion a year. And it seems perfectly reasonable that we can start to turn a portion of that into a pot of money that is funding retroactively the impact that projects are having in the world. And in the end, allow nonprofits, NGOs to spend 80% of their time creating impact and 20% of their time raising funding, and really just maximizing and coordinating that capital and maximizing the impact that comes out of it. So I'll close it out there, but would love to connect with anybody that's interested in any of those ideas. Always happy to jam and discuss how we can all collaborate.
Just a few things. I think most people in the room are familiar with Global Unity and part of the Global Unity Wisdom Council. If you're not, and you'd like to learn more, feel free to reach out to me. I just shared my details in the chat. Our next mastermind, again, is on financial innovation, regenerative finance, and new philanthropy. A lot of overlap with many of us in the room. So if you'd like to be part of that, just message me or we'll reach out. As well, Transformative Impact Summit Africa is happening June 7th to 9th in Zanzibar, followed by Transformative Impact Week. So won't go into too much depth right now, just in the interest of time. We are at the hour, so big thanks to everyone. I'm going to stick around for a little bit for anyone who wants to keep jamming or connect with others in the room. But appreciate everyone's great energy, great work, and let's keep it up and let's keep connecting.
Hi, everyone. I'm Raymond Chang, and with Carl, we're the two co-founders of Kariba Labs, where we are building Open Source Observer. It's a tool for measuring impact of open source software. So we help internet economies measure the impact of open source software and the contributions to the growth and adoption of their platform. In the short term, we're focusing predominantly on crypto networks to effectively allocate capital in programs such as RetroPGF, but our grander mission is to change how we fund public goods funding in the broader internet economy, which we all know is largely dependent on open source software. You can think of Open Source Observer as kind of like Moneyball for open source software. Open source funding today, when we hand out capital, it's a lot like baseball in the 1900s. We're leveraging pretty outdated methods without a clear understanding of what behaviors lead to success. And what we want to be able to do is to be able to provide sufficient insight through data science tools such that people can understand what is the impact ROI of the types of funding allocations they make and how they better advance the ultimate goals of their ecosystems. We think this is a huge opportunity because crypto networks still have quite a bit of money to deploy. Understanding both desirable impact outcomes, how to efficiently deploy them, that's going to be critical in this next wave of innovation. And we estimate that there's still over 30 billion, potentially more now, in ecosystem funds in treasuries that are going to be deployed in the short term, mostly going to be deployed towards open source software development. So this is a timely issue for most of these crypto networks. This is the graph that most of these crypto ecosystems care about. Ultimately, it boils down to users and developers. Higher quality retained developers on the x-axis here, growing a higher number of actively engaged users. How do we know whether or not these funding programs, these grant programs, RetroPGF programs, et cetera, are having the intended effect? that they're leading to real sustained retained growth over time and not just short-term blips in user traffic. So with Open Source Observer, we want to bring that visibility into what drives real progress so that funders can make better funding allocations to push this, up and to the right. We've been really excited to be working with, one of our first flagship partners, Optimism RetroPGF, which recently distributed about 30 million in OP tokens to over 500 open source projects with over 100 badge holders and voters in the ecosystem. And we're really excited that these voters will be leveraging Open Source Observer to help them in their voting. Just to give you a high level overview of the types of things that we're looking at right now. Classically, when we think about impact vectors, the types of things that we typically look at are things like let me take a pause here. I think Carl probably can speak to speak to this a little bit better.
I did the thing where I took some slides and threw these up at the last minute because we were working on the analysis just this morning. So I'm sorry to do a bait and switch on you, Ray. But just very quickly, I'll explain what you see here. If you want to measure impact, then ideally you need to have some kind of metric that's going to be correlated with that impact. And so part of the work here is actually identifying good metrics. We can all identify bad metrics, but ideally what we'll be able to do is identify better metrics. And then if you allocate funding against those metrics, then hopefully in the long run, there's some kind of signal which shows that people who contribute more in this area will receive more funding. And then you're able to actually change the incentives and people work differently. So what we did here is we created a few of these impact vectors during the RetroPGF round. So the first one here is just the size of the team. Obviously, we want more people to be working on these projects. And if you were to say, great, we will just pay you based on the number of active developers you have, then you'd see a certain result. Another one is the number of stars that a project has. I think we can all say that that's not like a very good metric, but it is a good way of measuring how popular a project is. And then finally, this is a thing that Optimism really do care about, which is how many on-chain users they have and what kind of activity they're doing. So in any case, we created these vectors ahead of time. There's others that we're not showing here, but basically you can plot each project against these different vectors and see which ones are average, above average, exceptional, etc. Now what we can do after the results are in is actually see how much money went to projects and whether there's any correlation between projects that are having more impact in the areas Optimism want, getting a higher share of funding. And the interesting result, and you're actually the first ones that are hearing this, we haven't even shared it with anyone else, is that they did not have the results that they were probably looking for here. The thing that mattered most to them, which is increasing on-chain activity, those projects received lower than average allocations, and there was very little correlation between an excellent project and an above average project getting more money. What was the best predictor? GitHub stars. So obviously there's a lot of very large and popular open source software projects which are featured there, and it's good that those things are getting funding. However, in the long run, if they do want to translate more funding into things that are happening on chain, then they're going to have to change the incentives and get better tracking that impact and incentivizing it. So again, this is hot off the presses, but if you are interested in this type of thing, then please go to the next slide, scan that QR code, and join our Telegram community. We'd love to have more people participating, helping analyze the data, surfacing new insights, and ultimately helping ecosystems fund the public goods that are most important to them. And I see you guys pulling out the QR code scanners right now, so hope to see you in there. Thanks so much.
This is going to be a quick one. Happy to talk to you all today. I'm Zach Bronstein. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Endowment.org, ENDAOMENT. We're a 501c3 community foundation that is focused on the Web3 and crypto space. Really, we wanted to build a crypto native solution to allow folks that have cryptocurrency to easily and compliantly make tax-deductible donations to US 501c3s. The thing that I'm excited to be talking to you guys about today, and I'm just going to share my screen, invented called the Universal Impact Pool. This was done in collaboration with Allo from Gitcoin and essentially is our version of nonprofit quadratic funding. Right now, if you're looking at my screen, you can see our Universal Impact Pool. You can see that you can donate. You can donate with crypto or stock or cash, but I guess I'm getting into sales mode a little bit. So why is this cool? So the way that this works is that all granting that comes out of this fund, money actually sent to nonprofits, is completely automatic. The Universal Impact Pool tracks all activity across the endowment ecosystem. We have deployments on Ethereum mainnet and Optimism and Base. We were actually a recipient of a grant from the OP RPGF. We just got notification about the amount last week. Super exciting. Would love more stars on GitHub. If you want to go find us on GitHub and add to our stars, apparently that would be good for next time. But the way that this works is it tracks all activity across all deployments, and then automatically at the end of each quarter takes 25% of its total balance and allocates it accordingly. Right now, we're looking at the fourth quarter distribution from 2023. We sent about $30,000 to 234 different organizations. And you can see this, the kind of split out here. You'll notice that there's this one organization that is kind of earning an outsized portion here. That's this orange slice. And the reason is because this organization, Hand in Hand Parenting, really decided to use endowment for receipt of all of their kind of end of year donations, a lot of cash donations. If you keep scrolling down, there are a couple of crypto, like Ethereum and Bitcoin donations. But just wanted to share it. It's really wonderful to see, and finding the right ways to make it easier for large DAOs or groups of people or entities to figure out, like, we want to be charitable, but how do we actually be charitable with these funds? In this way, we actually allow the donation events themselves to be the voting. That is how the community signals, hey, I want this organization to receive more funding because I really like them. The way that you do that, the way that you get your voice heard, is that you just make a donation, and then this pool will track that donation. We've had some measure of success in talking to DAOs or other groups of folks who say, I want to be charitable, but I don't know where to put it, and I don't want to have to make decisions every month or like have our DAO make a decision every month. So instead, in this way, we can allow the community to vote and then have the dollars follow those community votes. Also importantly, the act of donating is more important than the size of that donation, so that we don't see all the money going to an organization that received the most money during that quarter, but rather the most activity during that quarter. And that's all for endowment.org. Thanks so much.
Our work really sits at the intersection of sort of traditional education systems and Web3, and sort of just visioneering what durable infrastructure, not so much in the Web3 space, but sort of the bridges that need to get built from, I think the world a lot here are familiar with, and very sort of traditional school districts, universities, and some non-traditional spaces, trying to just meet people where they're at, where learning occurs. Have done a lot of just social work, but also recently built out an SDK called LearnCard, that is just sort of our version of a starting point for a wallet that can become what it needs to be in many different environments, knowing that learning and the acquisition of knowledge is very different depending on where you are, who you are. Certainly, whether digital access is an option or not, I want to hear from Jade and Mikhail. I'm less familiar with what they're up to, but I'm always curious.
I'll just give you a quick synopsis of what we're doing, what we've been up to. 12 Butterflies has been in stealth mode since 2019. I've just been running around the world, gathering the best products, the best projects, the best people, the best partners, the best investors, and just really aggregating best practices, best advisors, and just helping these guys scale as quickly as possible. So 12 Butterflies we've repurposed the 17 SDGs into 12 different verticals, which are RDGs, Regenerative Development Goals. So we don't just focus on climate tech, although it's important. We focus on all the issues at hand. So I think from plant medicine to prison reform to mental health issues, smart cities is a popular one of ours. We have an impact scoring system, which is in stealth as well, which will come out of stealth mode late this month, where we do full scope measurement. We've done this before, twice before actually, and we've realized that in a spot market that we created, that there's a 4 to 10 times uplift in the value of these climate differentiated commodities. So therefore we can incentivize the good actors as opposed from monetizing the bad actors. And the last bit of the equation is we have a a regulated exchange in London, which is also in stealth mode, where we realize infrastructure and as a new asset class. So we can raise 30-year notes, getting us away from the 5-year ship that is, the Blackstones and the BlackRocks that are just stripping up the asset value, and get back to these long-dated notes, where we can now, using our AI and algorithms we've developed over the last 8 years, look at a city or a sovereign nation and tell them which 3 infrastructure projects should be built and where. Because we can do this now, the Lloyds and the AIGs of the world, the up to 90% of the project value or the contract value, we can insurance wrap that and underwrite that with an insurance company before capital has been raised, which is a bit of a game changer. We can also put a political insurance wrapper around it for the global south. And that means we can also, in a sovereign deal, for instance, Kenya, which we're about to deploy, we use the Kiwi or the New Zealand way of looking at a balance sheet and taking your natural resources and your infrastructure on your balance sheet, getting us away from GDP. So this means that, when we deploy, for instance, to Kenya, it might be a 30-year note, but it's a sovereign bond. So the yield stays within the infrastructure of that bond. So by the time the bond matures, the interest can pay off the principal and the asset stays on the balance sheet of the sovereign nation. So stopping, these companies and countries are stripping out the asset value. That's probably the short version.
Our large focus is, sort of incorporating a lot of these concepts and ideas that I think we kind of share amongst everybody in regards to kind of, I guess, like funding mechanisms and stuff. We're just trying to find ways to kind of pair these tools with sort of Web2 sort of infrastructure, like whether it's like an HOA, a nonprofit, and these sort of like mechanisms, and kind of like providing more transparency as a public good and like accountability as a public good mechanisms, and like sort of like finding ways to like track it with specific measures and stuff too, and have people vote on maybe the efficiency, transparency of a specific like central entity within a system, and these sort of things is kind of like a big focus of ours. So still kind of building out and developing a lot of the systems and theories that we can maybe test out that wise, but it's kind of a little gist of what we're shooting for. I don't know if you want to add any to that.
No, I think you did great. I think the overall goal, I think, is to measure and optimize for the well-being of the people within different ecosystems. So by doing it through transparency and accountability.
Thanks for putting this on. I think this is amazing. The project that I'm talking about here is Proof of Philanthropy, which is basically a dynamic NFT project designed to address many of the points that Elliot had brought up at the start of the call, bringing people together across silos, gamifying contributions, creating basically a simpler, more effective, positive sum and normie-friendly way to engage the public in funding public goods across groups. And I've been working with Sean Robinson, who's on the call here from Better Giving, and some members from VitaDAO and other groups. And basically, what the aim here is that we've created a new type of sort of semi-soulbound NFT that we call demi-soulbound, which is a partially soulbound NFT, where basically if you have this type of NFT in your wallet, it can grow and change and power up in perks and aesthetics based on tracked, initially on-chain giving. And this is bound to the wallet that owns the NFT. So unlike a true soulbound NFT, you can trade this, and there might be some reasons to do that to create kind of like daisy-chained donations and some gamification angles. But the calculations that determine its power and perks is based on, say, the transactions that wallet holder has made, or eventually maybe some open source contributions or other track contributions, maybe through oracles, even eventually off-chain. So that's kind of the full roadmap. Currently, we're bridging into phase 2 right now, where we have this prototype technology working. We're using Polygon to do what's called blockchain anchoring to verify the giving on chain with signatures, and something that anyone can go and introspect on to make sure that people have made the contributions that they're being showcased for. And eventually the goal here is working with other organizations as data sources. For example, we worked with Gitcoin to recognize transactions to certain Gitcoin campaigns and certain charities. So this is a campaign that we had on Gitcoin. So this was actually really cool, where people could get an NFT essentially for free, donate to this Gitcoin campaign to support the project, and then see the NFT kind of power up, which is really cool. And one of the exciting aspects of this is that, unlike some of the other projects right now and potentially interweaving with them, it can make it very simple for Web2 brands, for example, to kind of ride along here, for a large, mega company to just say, hey, we're going to honor all of the platinum givers in the world with a discount on our cruise or something like that. So it can allow kind of decentralized perks to emerge, which we're eventually will track and aggregate. But in terms of, what can help drive this project forward, are data sources. Like, as mentioned, we're working with groups like Gitcoin and HyperCerts and eventually other charities and other things, but anything that could be a data source for these contributions would be valuable. And also perk givers. Again, some of these might be decentralized, but it would be really great to work with some sort of like first party collaborators, groups, say like Lens Protocol example, where, you can imagine that in the future, if we work with a group like, say, Twitter, anyone who has a gold level proof of philanthropy NFT gets Twitter Blue for free or something like that. And there's a border around your profile. So it can really create sort of these simple gamification mechanisms. And as mentioned here earlier, there was a quote from Vitalik that basically really kind of underlines this, that if there's a real simple, credibly neutral way to see like what are good projects to contribute to that are tracked in this way, it can also create vectors to say, hey, through the Proof of Philanthropy website, donate to this bucket, and we can collaborate with something like the Endowment University Impact Pool that was mentioned earlier, Universal Impact Pool, to create these kind of vectors to bring money into those groups that the contributions will be tracked for. So with that, if you want more information, you can get an NFT at pop.lifespan.io. Lifespan is a charity that was one of the first examples of this. And there's a long blog post on my website if you want to go to keithcomito.com to learn more. And I just want to kick it to Sean really quick in the 2 minutes that remain to see if there's anything that I might have left out in that quick pitch. Over to Sean.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much, Keith. I think that was really comprehensive. I think just wanted to highlight a couple points that he mentioned. The first is credibly neutral. I think a lot of the impetus for Proof of Philanthropy came from the fact that philanthropic data is relatively gated to the organization or institution that has that funding flow, right? What we're trying to do is open up those vectors to have full access and full reward for all philanthropic activity that happens first on chain, hopefully second iteration further down the road, actually off chain as well through trusted oracles. Another point on top of that is, how are we ensuring that that is a credible data source, right? So we can say there's a lot of maybe non-valid philanthropic activity that is happening on chain, but how do we make sure that it is valid? And I think that's with working with really strong partners and having a relatively like closed loop system at first. So the invitation for the data sources are going to the endowments, the better givings of the world, who have their own vetting process to make sure that the nonprofits that are receiving funds are registered 501c3 or something respective in that country's jurisdiction. And then I think the last thing that I wanted to hammer down, I know a lot of the talk here is thinking about the minutia of impact measurement, right? And really contextualize mechanisms and metrics for what actually constitutes impact. I think we are taking an incremental approach here. First, let's just make sure that all of the funding flows are accounted for appropriately, and then we can go down and get it more contextualized into specific outcomes, specific outputs that we are measuring for and rewarding. But I think right now there is just a need for having one aggregate of inflows that you can credibly verify and reward. So it's going to be a phased incremental approach, and I think this is a big step in the right direction. And yeah, please go to pop.lifespan.io, mint a free NFT, power it up with some philanthropic activity, and see it live.
Hey everyone, I've met many of you before. We're at Digital Gaia. We built basically a comprehensive technology platform to allow leaders in the global economy to navigate with confidence to solve nature risk. I'm just going to run through a high-level overview, but the entire basis of our effort has been on the idea that people are misunderstanding the concept of MRV, and they're conflating measurement with assessment. And ultimately, we've sort of not recognized the fact that MRV is itself a protocol, and it is usually defined on a top-down basis. So somebody somewhere in the world is defining what you measure, what the criteria for good measurement is, and what the criteria for good performance is. And that is kind of fine in the old economy, but creates a lot of externalities and leaves out a lot of people. And so we wanted to create a general purpose technology that would allow leaders in a responsible economy make decisions based on the context specific needs, and to defend those decisions in a global world where you have multiple jurisdictions coming at you, or multiple audiences coming at you with different perception of what impact is, and so how you can navigate that. And so we've built a combination of technologies basically around cross-dimensional, multi-scale federated modeling. So you look at something like climate, you model climate very differently at the global scale than you do at the farm scale or at the community scale. And then merging that with a federated tapestry of existing data and foundational models. You have 7 different soil models in the world. None of them are consilient, and different ones are used in different standards. How do you understand how to navigate there? How do you understand where the data could be improved on and things like that? And then lastly, we've combined it all with what we call life-centric AI. So how do we use AI to keep the voice of nature and the health of the planetary systems in decision-making, and merge those into a decision support platform that allows people to have fewer assumptions in their decisions, act with higher confidence, and ultimately deliver better outcomes. We put this all on a common surface that allows people, depending on whether they're working on the local acre of land or a community level or national level or global level, to understanding what's happening now in the world, what's about to happen, sort of the counterfactual assessment, as well as what might happen if I take what actions, and to defend the data based on those and the actions you take based on those with confidence and transparency and immutability in the data. I won't go into too much detail, but we are exploring, we're very focused on delivering real solutions in the real economy, whether they're coming out of the decentralized economy or the Web3 economy. If we can't solve these problems in the real economy, we can't really change the world. So how do we provide new backing for asset claims or new digital assets in voluntary markets? How do we help asset owners actually make decisions on how and what assets they own? We heard a little bit from 12 Butterflies about that kind of use case. The managers who are responsible for allocating all that capital, how do they decide and make decisions on moving trillions of dollars around the global economy and making sure it's going into the lowest risk, highest return investments that are including the externalities typically left out of normal economics? We're very active in supply chains. I think that's probably the greatest immediate opportunity for deployment of solutions to actually make a difference in the real economy and to make money and drive investment into more regenerative practices. And then lastly, all the corporations started to figure out to get on the TCFD or TNFD train. How do they start developing corporate strategies that are defensible and actionable across, 117 different jurisdictions in the world? I won't go into this much, and I'll just stop after this, but essentially we've created an analytic data mesh that allows people to bring their own proprietary data into an interface with open data systems that are out there, and maintain sovereignty of the data and ownership of data in a way that will attract and let people with very proprietary interest participate in this, expose their findings out into the world, but not risk exposing the core data, and allow sovereignty of the data. We also have developed a mechanism for automated digital twin creation that allows for enabled trusted predictive modeling and predictive decision making. We've created a collaborative surface for sense making and federated learning, so you can share this platform across your entire supply chain or your entire industry level action, and begin to collaborate on the core data, core understanding, core modeling tools. And then lastly, expose this out to the world for access to integrated planetary intelligence for use in local decision-making or global decision-making. And we're out there talking to leaders in the corporate world, in the policy-making world, in the regulatory world, and then ultimately the sort of standard-setting world, about using this as a basically centralized planetary decision intelligence system. So we get lumped a lot into the MRV world. How do you measure impact? But the reality is impact is very subjective, and it changes with scale, and it changes with time, and it changes with location. So we are really trying to reposition this whole conversation about how do you get access to planetary intelligence that's reliable and usable. The primary challenge that we have that we're looking for everybody's help on relates to, in order to build these systems, they got to be built pretty much from the bottoms up where you're integrating the best of data that's out there, the best models that are out there, and you're actually enabling an existing ecosystem to build these tools for their context, whether it's regenerative farming in a given ecosystem or the shipping industry or whatever. You need to activate and give these tools to them to start using, to make them start working and to build the flywheel of reliability and data. And so we're out looking for real world use cases where this can be put to work right now. So I think I stopped sharing. Happy to pass off to the next person.
That was fantastic. And I don't think I've heard you mention Digital Guy as a planetary decision engine. There was a word I'm missing there.
Yeah. I mean, we tend to get stuck in the context specific, like EDF. How do you back and validate environmental claims, which is not necessarily the same headspace as somebody saying, how do I make planetary decisions? But they're actual parts of the same process.
And I actually think it's very global unity. It fits right in.
I'm with Via Prize. So a little bit of an issue which is relevant to a lot of us. There's actually $30 billion lost every year on crowdfunding campaigns that don't deliver what was promised. Meaning, for example, you give money to something on Kickstarter, saying like, you give this amount of money, we'll build this thing. They never actually build the thing, right? So there's this challenge where we're trying to balance out builder security and funder confidence. Grants, for example, just give you upfront money, things like Gitcoin, and that creates builder security. I've been so grateful for that. Over 500 people contributed to us in just like small little donations, and that's all of our funding for building this current project. So love that. But as we see, money can be lost because there's no guarantees they actually do something good with it. On the other side, you have like Optimism Retro PGF. That optimizes for funder confidence. You've already seen it built and you've seen impact, so now you give it money. But for builder security, they have no idea, am I going to get money? When will I get it? How much? You're just kind of waiting to find out, right? But in the middle, we have crowdfunded prizes. So kind of like something between Kickstarter and Upwork. And yeah, the idea is you don't just hope for giving money in a way that's used well. You put money into an idea, then invite anyone to build that idea and then give it to them, also known as bounties, right? But we're the only platform which is doing bounties that you can crowdfund. We just call it prizes. That's just easier for most people, a lot of non-Web3 people, for example. So basically, someone comes up with a project idea, people add funding in, maybe a bunch of people add $20 like we did at Zuzalu, if you're familiar with that. We were testing out this idea, hashing it out with Vitalik and others, and just like a bunch of people tossing in 20 bucks into idea sometimes led to entire unplanned hackathons where he built awesome stuff, presented to the Prime Minister of Montenegro, and it was a really fun mechanism. It's motivating. Then you have a deadline. If no one builds it by the deadline, then you refund everyone. If people do build something, then you can vote and say, I put money into this and I get some vote on whether or not it wins. That's directly proportional for nerds like me. So benefits, right? You can think of it kind of three roles. You got the person who comes up with the idea, person who adds money into the idea, person who builds it. We do some other crowdfunding sort of things as well, which is being used here in Vitalia. If you guys are familiar with that, it's another Zuzalu inspired pop-up city. So we're really like living with our users, building this. It's all open source, open for ways to collaborate. For example, we thought, what if people add in money, get back impact certificates? And I think there's so many ways we can collaborate with the different projects who have presented, like Keith. It's great to see you again and the idea of proof of philanthropy. Love to chat more about that. Super inspired to be meeting everyone. And yeah, so just like an example, some of the projects, 2 people put 50 bucks into an app saying, if you open your phone, make sure that you say why you opened it. And someone built it, had over 10,000 downloads, and literally they just needed to see a couple people cared about it to put some money into it, and then they wanted to make this project and made it free for a bunch of people to use. The one that I care about most is we crowdfunded a prize to deliver medical supplies in Ukraine. So drove into the front line. I saw a drone get shot down as it was diving towards me, like kamikaze drone, and eventually made it to the medics. They received it. For the cost of $3,500, we gave them enough medical supplies that they used it to save multiple lives, and they sent us pictures afterwards. And that's when we decided to actually pursue this full time. So new project and really inspired by things you guys are doing, developers in India, and thanks for this time.
Cool. Yeah, so Impact Oracle is a project I've been working on. I've been working in the impact field for about over a decade, but specifically in impact measurement and management over the past 7 years. And it's kind of a frustration of mine that impact is a lot of the times a PR tool rather than a tool to compensate somebody for a job well done, or people don't want to pay things that they don't have to pay. And so impact has to be kind of marketed as a really great way to show how great your company is rather than doing the right thing. And so because it's a voluntary thing, a lot of organizations don't do it. It costs money. You got to pay somebody to do the work, check the work, verify, put it on the market, whatever it is. It's complicated, so you got to hire those people, and you don't have to do any of it. So why would you? And that is essentially what most people do. Most organizations around the world, they don't have like extra budget to create impact with, nor do they see it as their mission. And in fact, it might be illegal for them to use their profits for good, because they'll get fired the next day for the not having a good fiduciary duty. And this is a thing that's always bothered me. So the question that we're all kind of thinking about is, how do we make impact profitable? How do we do that? And there's kind of the carrot and the stick there. There's the regulation that grows. There's all sorts of policies that are being adopted and things that are growing. And on the other side, and we keep on hearing about initiatives here that are figuring out, like, how do we reward it? How do we give people this stuff? And some of it's Web3, but a lot of it's actually super regular in terms of, even in the US right now, the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, basically gives a lot of incentives to companies to do good environmentally, right? And that's outside the carbon market and things like that. And so what we're actually seeing happening is, there's that carrot, there's that stick, and then there's this kind of middle space of, well, how do we manage all of this data? And we're not totally there yet, right? So it's still happening. So Impact Oracle is basically trying to enable everybody to realize the value that they are creating in their impact. So essentially to get paid for creating positive impact. And the way we do that is essentially by looking at the data. What are the companies doing? And how do we compensate them? And we're not trying to be the ones that are compensating, and we're not trying to be the ones that assess the data. We're not trying to do any of that. We're just trying to look at what information already exists. What do we know about your company already from looking at your whatever SaaS system, your CRM, your ERP, your logistics information? What can we glean from that and say, oh, it seems like you folks are creating a lot of plastic waste. Maybe we can figure out how to reduce that and get you tokens from Plastics, which is another organization that I met through Global Unity. Or if they are sequestering carbon or avoiding power usage, or maybe they've installed solar panels, maybe they can get a tax break for that. Most companies don't really think about this stuff too much. They're looking at their profit and loss sheet, and they're trying to figure out how they optimize their business, not their impact. But if we can put impact into dollar terms and fit that into your accounting system, whatever it is, then perhaps you will make different business decisions that end up being impactful. And the idea is to make that really, really simple. So integrate into whatever systems you're using, find the correlation between whatever impact you might be creating to whatever profit you might be eligible for, and essentially make that exchange for you on the back end really simply with the variety of tokens and credits and tax breaks and so on that exist out there, whether they are Web3, Web2, or policy related. And so that's essentially what we're doing. Yeah, I won't get too much into kind of how we're doing that, but I think that this is essential. I kind of mentioned this before. That's my little soapbox. Like, how do we internalize these rewards, these incentives, these costs, so it's clear to whoever is running a business why they should be impactful, and maybe not even explain to them that it's about being impactful. Maybe we can be a little bit cynical and say, here's a way to just make some more money. Why don't you just do that and grow your bottom line? And they don't care. So, oh, what, install solar panels? Whatever. They don't even have to believe in climate change. I don't care. They just have to understand why they're like that. They need to do this thing. And so that's kind of the systemic thing here. Most people, I think, don't wake up in the morning and ask themselves how they can do more bad or more good. They just live their lives and do whatever the system has kind of set out for them. And so I think everybody here is a bit of a systems thinker and kind of sees exactly what we're talking about. I was essentially drafted into this project called the Ecological Benefits Framework, which has been really, really awesome. And what the EBF is a language to describe all impact in terms of air, water, soil, biodiversity, equity, and carbon. And those 6 things are a lot of the times where most impact ends up, right? So most of the times it ends up on air, water, soil, biodiversity, equity, or carbon. And then what we do is kind of measure one of them, right? We look at, I don't know, how much carbon you've emitted or saved, and we'll compensate you or tax you accordingly or whatever, depending on where you live. And the thing is that I kind of got into that project because when I was working on Impact Oracle, I noticed that there's all these initiatives that are all working on tokens or compensation in different forms, but they don't use the same language to talk about impact. Kind of, there's no standard, right? So plastics want to compensate you for saving plastic. They develop their whole own system. And carbon, I mean, there's like 7 different registries that kind of define what it is, and then thousands of ways of being compensated for that, and so on. And each one of these is very different and makes things very, very complicated. And there's not a shared language. And so the EBF, the Ecological Benefits Framework, creates a shared language for all of that. And we just finished working on the first sprint of that. Maybe in March we do the second one. So I'm looking forward to that. And I'll pause here because I see you have questions.
Well, I when you brought that up, it just made me curious too, because like, so you're to your point, right? Everyone's measuring what they're measuring and focused on. Does that also help you get to like negative second order effects? Like the obvious example is Tesla. You know, focus so much on saving energy using solar power, and then you ignore the second order effect of all of the environmental waste created and unrecyclability of it and all that kind of jazz.
And mining minerals for it, obviously, yeah. So there's 2 answers. The first is I've not solved this yet, so I don't know, exactly how we do all of the things. We're kind of the collective we are kind of in a place right now where, sure, everybody wants a holistic impact report and understand exactly all these different things, but companies maybe don't want to give a holistic view of all of their impact. And so there's always this tension, kind of like, oh, I can be compensated for impact, but I can also be punished for impact. So what do I like? Where do I end up on this scale? And I would argue that it is the responsibility of the current powers that be, government, call it, taxation, and so on, to dampen the negative effects. And it is a market responsibility to a degree to compensate for positive impact. Now, it should all be the state, honestly. Like if we lived in a perfect system, it'd all be the state. But it's not. And I think that it's actually right now the problem isn't even that yet. The problem is we don't even have a way to talk about this stuff. We don't have a shared language for this. We don't have consensus over what it looks like. And so even if the state wanted to tax, and even if I wanted to compensate, we might not be talking the same language. So I'm not sure that the impact will be that far reaching because we can't communicate. And that's why this language was really important to kind of pause Impact Oracle for about a year now and do this project that with the Ecological Benefits Framework, because this can be potentially that language. And a lot of people are getting excited about it. So I think that that's where we are kind of in that journey.
All right. We just heard about Elliot Bayev. I'm excited about Global Unity because of the weaving work they're doing. And I also think this Impact Mastermind was full of a lot of really great projects. Thanks again for listening to the GreenPilled.network podcast. Again, we were building a coordination, a network society of thousands of hackers, dreamers, and doers focused on using crypto to bring positive some digital systems to the world, like Elliot, like Global Unity, like the people that you saw in this Impact Mastermind. Again, all episodes during this season are available on chain. Go to pods.media to collect this episode. And while you're at it, why don't you like, subscribe, share, and review the Greenpill podcast? It really helps us with this work of building a movement, of building this network society of more protopian crypto. Peace and love. See you next time.